The winter of 1886 brought the worst blizzard in Montana Territory history, burying homesteads under 10 feet of snow and killing dozens of travelers caught unprepared by the sudden storm. But for Sarah Mitchell, a 30-year-old widow living alone in an isolated cabin, that deadly blizzard would bring something far more important than survival, a chance to save a dying stranger and discover that sometimes the warmth we offer others becomes the fire that thaws our own frozen hearts. Sarah had been widowed for 3 years, ever since her husband James died in a logging accident and left her alone on their remote mountain homestead with nothing but determination and the survival skills he'd taught her. At 30, she had resigned herself to a life of solitude, convinced that no man would want a widow living in isolation, that her chance at love and family had died with James, and that her future consisted of merely surviving rather than truly living. She told herself she preferred the isolation, that dealing with people meant risking the kind of devastating loss she'd experienced when James died, that being alone was safer than opening her heart to someone who might leave through death or choice. That carefully constructed emotional protection shattered on a brutally cold February evening when Sarah heard a sound that didn't belong in her world of wind and silence, a horse's desperate whinny followed by the unmistakable thud of something heavy falling in the snow near her fence line. Sarah grabbed her heaviest coat and a lantern, fighting through waist-deep snow toward the sound, knowing that in these temperatures, minutes could mean the difference between life and death. What she found made her heart clench with fear and determination. A cowboy lay collapsed against her fence, his horse standing over him protectively despite the blizzard. The man was maybe 32 or 33, with dark hair crusted with ice and a face that would have been handsome if not deathly pale from cold. His clothing was inadequate for the storm, suggesting he'd been caught unprepared when the blizzard came up suddenly, and his lips were already turning blue, the unmistakable sign of hypothermia that would kill him within the hour if she didn't act immediately. Sarah knelt beside him in the snow, pulling off her gloves to check his pulse with bare hands. It was there, weak and thready, but present. The cowboy's eyes flickered open briefly, unfocused and confused, trying to understand where he was and who was touching him. "Stay with me," Sarah commanded, her voice firm despite the terror she felt. "I'm going to save you, but I need you to help me." "Can you stand?" The cowboy tried to respond, but his jaw was clenched with shivers too violent for speech. Sarah made a quick decision born from years of frontier survival. She couldn't drag him to the cabin alone, but she could get him moving enough to help. "Listen to me," she said, pulling his face close to hers so he could focus on her words despite his fading consciousness. "I can heat you. I can save your life. But you have to trust me and help me get you inside. Do you understand?" And that's when you realize this isn't just about surviving a blizzard. It's about two isolated souls discovering that sometimes salvation comes in the form of a stranger's desperate promise to share their warmth, which is exactly why you should hit that subscribe button right now, because watching how this widow and frozen cowboy heal each other while fighting for his survival will prove that the deepest connections are forged in life or death moments when strangers become everything to each other. Through sheer determination and the cowboy's fading but stubborn will to survive, Sarah managed to get him into her cabin. She secured his horse in her small barn with hay and blankets, then focused entirely on the far more urgent task of saving the man who was dangerously close to freezing to death in her home. Sarah had learned emergency cold treatment from James, who had nearly died himself in an early winter storm before they married. She knew that gradual warming was essential, that rushing the process could cause shock and death, and that the most effective method involved direct body heat transfer in ways that would normally be considered scandalous. But Sarah wasn't thinking about scandal or propriety. She was thinking about saving a life. She stripped the cowboy's frozen clothing with efficient hands, wrapping him in every blanket she owned and placing heated stones wrapped in cloth around his torso to begin gradual warming. She forced warm broth between his blue lips, tilting his head to prevent choking, and monitored his pulse and breathing with the focused intensity of someone who understood how close to death he remained. For 3 hours, Sarah fought to keep the cowboy alive, watching his color gradually return from deathly pale to something approaching normal, his violent shivers slowly giving way to more controlled trembling, his breathing deepening from shallow gasps to something stronger. When his eyes finally opened with genuine awareness rather than confused delirium, the first thing the cowboy saw was Sarah's face inches from his own, her beautiful features marked by exhaustion and fierce determination, her hands still checking his pulse with professional efficiency. "You're alive," Sarah said, relief evident in her voice. "You were damn close to dying, but you're alive." The cowboy's voice was rough when he finally spoke. "You saved me. I don't even know your name." "Sarah Mitchell, this is my homestead. You collapsed against my fence during the blizzard." She pulled back slightly, suddenly aware of how intimate their positioning had become during her life-saving efforts. "What's your name?" Cole Brennan." He tried to sit up and immediately discovered he was wrapped in what felt like every blanket in Montana territory. "How long was I out there?" "Long enough that you should be dead," Sarah said bluntly. "Your core temperature was dangerously low when I found you. Another 30 minutes and you would have frozen solid. But you haven't seen the most important part yet." The blizzard continued for 3 more days, trapping Cole at Sarah's cabin while he recovered from his near-death experience. During those days of forced proximity, Sarah discovered that Cole Brennan was far more than just a cowboy who had gotten caught in a storm. He was a horse trader traveling between ranches, had been heading to the next settlement when the blizzard came up faster than weather predictions suggested, and possessed an easy charm that made conversation flow naturally despite the unusual circumstances of their meeting. More importantly, Cole treated Sarah with genuine respect rather than the mixture of pity and awkwardness most people showed widows, and he seemed genuinely interested in her life rather than just grateful for rescue. "How long have you been living out here alone?" Cole asked on the second evening as they shared a meal by the fire. 3 years since my husband died," Sarah replied. "Most people think I should have moved to town, found work as a seamstress or boarding house keeper, maybe remarried if anyone would have me. But this place is mine. James and I built it together, and leaving would feel like abandoning everything we worked for." Cole studied her face in the firelight, seeing strength that went deeper than just physical survival. "You don't seem like someone who needs rescuing from isolation. You seem like someone who chose it deliberately." Sarah smiled at his perceptiveness. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's done the same thing," Cole admitted. "I've been traveling alone for 5 years now, telling myself I prefer it, that staying in one place means getting attached to people who'll eventually leave or disappoint you. But lately I've started wondering if isolation is protection or just a slower form of dying." The observation hit Sarah harder than she cared to admit. "When you found me in that snow, when you said you could heat me, what did you mean?" Sarah felt her cheeks flush, despite years of widow's independence. "I meant I could save your life using body heat transfer, if necessary. It's the most effective treatment for severe hypothermia. I was prepared to do whatever it took to keep you alive. Even if it meant—" Cole trailed off, but his meaning was clear. "Even if it meant compromising my widow's propriety by sharing body heat with a complete stranger," Sarah confirmed. "Your life was worth more than my reputation, Cole Brennan. Though, fortunately, the blankets and heated stones worked well enough that more dramatic measures weren't necessary. Wait. Don't miss what happens next." On the 4th day, the blizzard finally broke, leaving the world transformed by snow and brilliant sunshine that made the frozen landscape sparkle like diamonds. Cole's horse had survived the storm in Sarah's barn, and there was no reason for him to remain except that neither of them wanted him to leave. "I should get going," Cole said without much conviction, standing at Sarah's door and looking out at the snow-covered trail. "You've been more than generous with your hospitality, and I've imposed long enough." "You haven't imposed," Sarah said quietly. "Having someone to talk to, someone to share meals with, I didn't realize how much I'd missed that until you were here. These past few days have reminded me what it feels like to have companionship instead of just survival." Cole turned to face her fully, seeing his own loneliness reflected in her eyes. "Sarah, I came to your fence half dead from cold and you saved my life. But these past few days, you've done something more important. You've reminded me that isolation isn't the same as peace, that walls built to protect hearts end up imprisoning them instead. He stepped closer, his hand reaching up to touch her face with the same gentleness she'd shown when checking his pulse during those desperate hours of fighting for his survival. What if I didn't leave? What if I stayed here, helped you run this homestead, gave you the companionship you've been missing and the partnership I've been running from? What if we took the connection we've built during this storm and turned it into something permanent? Sarah felt her carefully protected heart crack open at his words. Cole, you don't owe me anything just because I saved your life. You're free to leave, free to continue traveling, free to make the choice I want instead of the one I think I should make, Cole interrupted. And what I want is to stay here with you, to see if what we've started during the storm can grow into something beautiful when the snow melts. Their first kiss was gentle and tentative. Two people who had been protecting themselves from connection, discovering that the warmth they'd shared to save his life had ignited something far more powerful than either had expected. What you're seeing now is nothing compared to what comes next. Cole's decision to stay transformed both their lives in ways neither had anticipated. He brought skills to the homestead that complemented Sarah's, horse training expertise that allowed them to build a side business, breeding and selling quality animals, trading connections that brought income without requiring Sarah to leave her beloved home, and most importantly, the companionship that turned survival into actually living. Sarah brought Cole the stability and purpose he'd been running from, a home rather than just a series of temporary stops, a partner who valued his skills and his company equally, and the kind of acceptance that let him stop moving and start building something lasting. But more than practical benefits, they brought each other the courage to risk their hearts again after both had decided isolation was safer than connection. Sarah's promise to heat Cole had been literal in that desperate moment fighting hypothermia, but it became metaphorical as they learned to warm each other's frozen hearts with patience, understanding, and growing love. The proposal came naturally during the first spring thaw when snow melted to reveal the homestead Sarah and James had built, and Cole had helped maintain through the long winter. Cole had been repairing the fence where Sarah first found him, and she had brought him lunch, and somehow the moment felt right for putting into words what they'd both been feeling for months. Sarah Mitchell, Cole said, taking her hands in his work-roughened ones, I came to your fence half-frozen and desperate, and you saved my life with a promise that you could heat me. You've kept that promise every day since, not just keeping my body warm, but thawing a heart I thought was permanently frozen. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend my life proving that the best thing that ever happened to me was nearly dying in your snow? Sarah felt tears blur her vision, happy tears this time rather than the grief she'd been carrying for 3 years. Cole Brennan, you crashed into my isolated life and reminded me that I was surviving but not living, existing but not thriving. You've shown me that loving again doesn't diminish what I had with James. It honors it by proving his death didn't kill my capacity for joy. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll build a life with you on this homestead. And yes, I'll spend every day grateful that you nearly froze to death at my fence. The wedding took place in summer, with wildflowers covering the meadow where Cole had nearly died just months earlier. When the traveling preacher asked if Cole took Sarah as his wife, his answer rang across the mountains with absolute conviction. I take this woman who saved my life when I was freezing to death and then saved my soul when I was dying from loneliness. I promise to be the partner who helps her thrive rather than just survive, to honor the husband she lost while building the future we'll share, and to spend every day grateful that a blizzard brought me to exactly where I was supposed to be. Sarah's vows were equally powerful. Cole, you came to my life when I'd convinced myself isolation was preferable to risking loss again. You've shown me that the bravest thing we can do is open our hearts despite knowing they might break, that love is always worth the risk of pain, and that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst circumstances. I promise to keep you warm in every sense, body, heart, and soul, and to build with you a life where both of us are valued for exactly who we are. Years passed, and the Mitchell homestead, now the Brennan Ranch, flourished under Sarah and Cole's partnership. They raised horses that were known throughout Montana Territory for their quality and temperament, built a reputation for honest dealing that brought customers from hundreds of miles away, and most importantly, created a home filled with love, laughter, and the warmth that comes from two people who chose each other after both had given up on choosing anyone. They had 4 children who grew up hearing the story of how their father nearly froze to death at their mother's fence, and their mother saved him with a promise that she could heat him. The children learned that courage meant opening your heart even when it had been broken, that the best love stories often begin with desperate circumstances, and that sometimes salvation comes in the form of a stranger's promise to share their warmth. On their 20th anniversary, as they stood together at the fence where Sarah had found Cole that brutal winter night, she reflected on her promise that saved his life. "When I said I could heat you, I had no idea how prophetic those words would be. I thought I was just offering to save you from freezing. Instead, I was offering to thaw both our frozen hearts." Cole pulled her close, this woman who had saved him in every way a person can be saved. "Best worst night of my life. Worst because I nearly died in that blizzard. Best because it brought me to your fence, to your warmth, and eventually to your heart. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that the warmth we offer others often becomes the fire that thaws our own frozen hearts, then you've found your home. Subscribe to Wild West Romance Stories for more tales of life-saving promises, isolated souls finding connection, and love that grows from desperate circumstances into something beautiful and lasting. From blizzard rescues to summer weddings, every story proves that the bravest thing we can do is risk our hearts again when life has taught us that love means potential loss. This is where frozen hearts learn to feel again, where strangers become saviors, and where love proves that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst moments.